Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is how good intentions sometimes go awry. They miss the mark. Let me begin with a quote. More people died in 2 weeks of peace with Dubai than in 70 years of war with them. That's a quote. That was the unsuccessful attempt at a joke made by Dr. Sharon Alroy-Price, head of public health in the Israeli Health Ministry. Dr. Alroy-Price made the statement one recent morning while participating in a Zoom meeting with the heads of all of Israel's hospitals. All of Israel's hospitals. Alroy-Price was forced to apologize and indeed acknowledge that it was a bad joke and in poor taste. But there is much truth to what she said. Just last week, on a single flight returning to Israel from Dubai, 14 people tested positive for coronavirus. This week, a single person tested positive and created a chain involving and infecting 180 people after returning from a trip to Dubai. The Dubai effect is not limited to Israel. What is happening in Israel is happening in other countries as well. Countries enticed by the lure of Dubai, a green country. Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, was thought of as an escape from COVID. There are no restrictions in Dubai. Young people are able to be free to walk, enjoy all that Dubai has to offer, luxuries that are no longer permitted at home, like dining with friends and partying, bars, dancing, etc. No masks, no social distancing, paradise in the midst of a pandemic. People from all over the world flock to Dubai for vacation. In Dubai, you could pretend that COVID no longer hovered over our lives and our health until you went back home and felt ill or were tested positive. Truth is, all was not as it seemed in Dubai. All was not as people wanted it to be. 240,000 expatriates from the United Kingdom live in Dubai, and among their friends who came to visit and to party, there were COVID carriers. Along with their bathing suits and dancing shoes, they brought the new COVID variant with them from England. Many countries banned flights to and from the United Kingdom, but not the Emirates Air. They fly 5 daily flights from Heathrow, London to Dubai. Dubai opened to Israelis this summer with the signing of the Abraham Accords, and flights between Tel Aviv and Dubai took off. Some of those flights were even offset by assistance programs to develop new businesses. What irony. In the midst of COVID lockdown, when only Israelis could enter or leave their country, Israel was, albeit unintentionally, and in the name of friendly relations, sponsoring flights from the hotbed of COVID back into Israel. Several experts watching events unfold and passengers disembark dubbed the Israeli-Dubai connection a ticking time bomb, and they were so right. So what do? You can try to make a joke about it, as did Dr. Sharon Alroy-Price, or you can try to prevent people from going and coming until COVID numbers are more manageable. In December, Israel began discussions about shutting down all flights to and from Dubai and classifying it as a red country, not a green country. But the counter-argument that a travel ban mandated by Jerusalem could create diplomatic backlash with Dubai that would impact the peace momentum prevailed. Dr. Alroy-Price was one of the loudest people arguing that vacationers to Dubai would return from vacation and infect other Israelis. She argued that allowing travel to Dubai was a major tactical flaw in the crackdown Israel was so diligently enforcing throughout the country, including lockdowns and GPS tracking and school closures and business closures to prevent the spread of COVID. Some health officials in Israel go so far as to assert that Dubai was the source of the reinfection in Israel, but that's not absolutely clear and is difficult to prove. Israel, a different land and a different kind of democracy than the United States, there's no question. In Israel, security establishment and the government have more control over movement than they do in the United States. Jerusalem can restrict civil liberties expressly because of many security issues facing the country. And because these features are already in place to protect against terror and improve national safety and security, it was easy to tweak them a little bit to protect against COVID. Israel has shut down all its borders, air, sea, and land. They have tracked the cell phones of their citizens, until very recently at least, Israel tracked people who tested positive to make certain that they remained in isolation. They contacted anyone who had come within 6 feet of a person who tested positive by tracking their phones and sent an SMS message instructing them of the need to quarantine. This system was originally put into place to track terrorists. It was never used to track Israelis until COVID, of course. While it's no longer in place, until recently it was not unusual for one member of a family to get a message that sent the entire family into quarantine for 14 days. Fundamentally, people should be free to make their own decisions, but ethically and medical questions arise when these decisions endanger the lives of others and many others. COVID has changed our lives in so many more ways, and varied ways, and far-reaching ways than we could ever have imagined. I've also been thinking about the future, the politics of the future, and the political future. Lovers of Israel have hopes, but no real idea of what the future holds within the Biden administration. No idea of what the future will look like. After 4 years of riding the wave of unprecedented pro-Israel policy, the future is bound to be, if only by comparison, bleak. The Trump White House and Bibi Netanyahu marched together, arm in arm, on every Middle East issue, from the Palestinians to Syria to Iran. Jerusalem was recognized as the capital of Israel, and the United States Embassy was moved there. Also recognized was Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And for the first time in so many years, Israel was resoundingly and repeatedly defended in the international arena and in the United Nations by the United States. There was direct communication between leaders. Trump and Netanyahu enjoyed one another's company. They spoke to each other directly, without the need for diplomatic protocols and ambassadors. Even their disagreements were handled with ease. Now, there is a new administration, and while the optics of the new administration look straightforward enough, lovers of Israel are holding their collective breath. The Jewish community in the United States is not one unified mass. The largest diaspora Jewish community is divided on every issue, and so too on Israel. American Jewry is not what it once was. The Jewish community is no longer voting on one issue, Israel.
And I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
Those American Jews who are not committed to Israel feel no anxiety about the Biden administration's Israel policy. Israel is headed for elections. The outcome of that election is too far away and too convoluted to predict. In the here and now, the relationship between Washington and Jerusalem is contingent upon the relationship between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. There will be interaction and positive engagement. There must be, because of history and mutual benefits. But there need not be tension. Tensions make relationships complicated and difficult. There is history, and I say history, between these two leaders. That history needs to be dealt with. And it is Prime Minister Netanyahu who needs to be the bigger man. But as of this taping, Biden and Netanyahu have still not spoken. And there is also history, a long-standing history, of a quick and important meeting between new administrations. Whenever a new leader was elected as President of the United States or as Prime Minister of Israel, that meeting would take place within a few days, just a few days of their assuming office, at most a week after the inauguration. The Israeli Prime Minister would hop on a plane to Washington, and the two leaders would affirm essential agreements related to special relationships and sharing essential and important security information. That meeting, too, as of this taping, has not been scheduled. Obviously, a big issue for lovers of Israel is whether Biden and how Biden and his administration will approach Israel. While it is clear that President Biden and his team understand just how valuable Israel and the United States and the bond between the United States and Israel is, what is not so obvious is how they will embrace and interpret that bond. Now Netanyahu needs to turn on the charm. Many of the officials in the Biden administration, including Biden himself, have felt the sting of past Bibi antics during the Obama presidency. The Prime Minister needs to tone down his long-honed arrogance. He needs to be sincere and put it all on the line. He needs to approach the new president of the United States and his team, those he has dealt with in the past as well as newbies, with humility. He must think of this interaction as would a young man approaching his father for a favor. A young man asking his future father-in-law, maybe, for his daughter's hand in marriage. This is not going to be easy for Bibi, but that does not diminish its importance. Dramatically and diplomatically, militarily, and for issues of security, Israel needs the United States, and the United States needs Israel. But that does not mean that the United States and Israel are equals. That is why humility and a character trait, by the way, that is not strong for many Israelis, and not for the Prime Minister especially. This expression of let bygones be bygones needs to ring true for Joe Biden and Bibi. The leaders of the United States and Israel should not, cannot, and must not be adversaries. They need to be partners. Their relationship must be positive. Israelis need to understand that disagreements do not equal anti-Semitism. Tony Blinken, the new U.S. Secretary of State, is not an enemy. He may have been a key player in the Iranian negotiations, but he is an extremely talented diplomat with a great deal of experience at this juncture. He should be viewed as a strong ally. This is the history between Blinken and the Jews. He is predisposed towards Jews in Israel. He is Jewish. Samuel Pizer, who passed away in 2015, was his stepfather. Pizer was an outstanding Jewish leader, a hero. He survived 7 Nazi camps, including Auschwitz, Majdanek, Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and the Engelberg tunnels. Of the 900 students in his school in Bialystok, Samuel Pizer was the sole survivor. This is not to say that Blinken will do whatever Israelis want. What it means is that he is not out to get Israel, to do her damage, and neither is his boss. Israel is strong and will remain strong. Israel is stronger when the United States has her back. Hopefully, under the new administration, the United States will have Israel's back. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from Ynet, published on January 24th, 2021. It's authored by Alex Fishman, one of Yediot's regular diplomatic columnists. It's entitled, Biden will not wait for Israel to make moves on Iran. Subtitled, Analysis. The new U.S. administration is nothing like its predecessor, and Netanyahu's insistence on sidelining the defense establishment could leave Jerusalem with little to no say in the upcoming nuclear negotiations with the Islamic Republic. Fishman's thesis is plain and straightforward. Biden and his advisors already have an Iranian strategy. If Israel wants any input, they should get involved sooner rather than later. Fishman describes Bob Malley, the person who will be leading the entire Iranian plan for Biden. This is how Fishman begins. The new White House is eyeing Mideast expert and conflict resolution specialist Robert Malley to head the talks on the United States' return to the nuclear agreement with Iran. Malley, who has a Jewish American mother and a Jewish Egyptian father, that's Jewish on both sides, by the way, was part of the former President Bill Clinton's team at July 2000 Camp David Summit and a senior official in Barack Obama's administration. He is the current CEO of the International Crisis Group in Washington, which carries out analysis on global crises. By looking at the group's previous studies on the Iranian nuclear agreement, one can easily extrapolate the course of action the Biden administration will take on the issue. Fishman is 100% correct. It is easy to figure out where Biden's team is coming from and where they are headed. Members of the Biden team have already published their views, and Biden subscribes to them. These are not secret plans, and Iran is well aware of them too, by the way. Fishman continues. Firstly, there will be a freeze until after Iran holds its presidential elections in June of this year. After that, the U.S. will launch two separate negotiation tracks with Iran, one on the nuclear program and the other on development of ballistic missiles and Iranian interference in the Middle East. Fishman contrasts the Biden plan with Netanyahu's plan and points out that Netanyahu is not including military security advisors in his decision-making. Fishman comes to the following conclusion. The Prime Minister's office, meanwhile, has decided to sideline defense ministry, despite it being in regular contact with the United States administration on strategic issues. Netanyahu has decided to tackle the Iranian issue the same way he decided to tackle the coronavirus crisis, with him at the helm, supported by the National Security Council alone. The problem is that the United States will not wait for Israel to work through its political divisions and will move ahead with new Iran talks with or without us. Next up is a column from the Jerusalem Post. It was written on January 31st, 2021, and is entitled, "Peace Between Iran and Israel is Inevitable." Subtitled, "The U.S. should be ready to provide the bridge between these two great peoples and lead the Middle East into a new Cyrus Accords-like era." It's authored by Victoria Coates and Len Khodorkovsky. Victoria Coates is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the former Deputy National Security Advisor for Middle East, Eastern, and North African Affairs. Len Khodorkovsky is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Digital Strategy and Senior Advisor to the United States Special Representative for Iran. The thought that went into this is good, but to even posit that there will be an agreement between Iran and Israel puts your analysis way out of the realm of possible. Peace between Israel and Iran is an interesting thought, a good idea to think about, but it's not a reality, certainly not in the near future. This is how they begin. The recent momentum toward peace in the Middle East has been breathtaking. Multiple U.S. brokered deals between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, known as the Abraham Accords, are creating a new reality in one of the world's most combustible neighborhoods that, with U.S. leadership, promises a more prosperous and secure future for Arabs and Jews alike. This is all correct. The authors know this is all to be true. They continue. An impetus behind this historic normalization of relations between the Jewish state and its Muslim neighbors is practical. They face a common threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has been labeled by the State Department as the world's leading sponsor of terrorism for nearly 4 decades. Driven by revolutionary theology, the Islamic Republic's regime has been metastasizing across the region since its founding in 1979. From funding and arming anti-Israel terrorists to blowing up Saudi oil facilities to pirating commercial vessels in the Persian Gulf, Iran is the Middle East's preeminent menace. Not only is it out of step with the Abraham Accords, Iran is the neighborhood's chief purveyor of discord. This is also correct. The authors are right. So is their assertion that the Iranian leadership does not represent the masses in Iran. All of that is correct. The problem is that their prediction for the future, their prediction that there be an agreement between Iran and Israel is ridiculous. They conclude with a dream, not a plan. Here's their conclusion. Wouldn't it be poetic if the era of the Abraham Accords could be followed by an era of Cyrus Accords? After all, Israelis and Iranians have a lot in common. Both peoples are highly educated. Both are technologically savvy. Both have millennia-old traditions that have successfully intertwined in the past, and both crave peace in the not-so-distant future. Given the Iranian regime's pathological anti-Semitism and belligerence, the notion of the Cyrus Accords may seem far-fetched, but this regime is a historical anomaly. The day when the descendants of Abraham and the descendants of Cyrus will reconnect in peace and prosperity may be much sooner than we think. The United States should be ready to provide the bridge between these two great peoples and lead the Middle East into a new era. This is, to put it politely, simply way off base. But that's their right. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 5 cartoons and memes today. The first up is a cartoon that clearly shows the inequity in the distribution between COVID-19 vaccines around the world. Wealthy nations are able to distribute the vaccine while poor nations are ill-equipped. That seems obvious. The cartoon is entitled Sharing Vaccine and is by Guy Parsons from Canada. This cartoon was published on January 28th, 2021. The second meme with the cast of Gilligan's Island. Do you remember that? To remind you, the theme of the television show is this disparate group of people, a tycoon, a professor, a movie star, are shipwrecked on a deserted island. In episode after episode, they try to and fail to get saved. They're always sending messages in bottles. The caption of this meme reads, "The bottle came back." The note says, "Stay where you are. The U.S. has gone crazy." Next is a play on the ubiquitous Bernie Sanders image of the Biden inauguration, from the Biden inauguration. It has him sitting in a chair with woolen mittens. You remember that? People have pasted it and memed it everywhere. In this case, Bernie is sitting in Archie Bunker's chair from All in the Family. That seat was the holy of holies. No one could sit in it but Archie. The text reads, "Who the H is this old man and why is he sitting in my chair?" As an aside, Rob, Meathead, the son-in-law in All in the Family, is played by none other than Carl Reiner's son, one of the greatest writers and directors ever. Now a meme that is a play on German. There's a 32-letter word on a sign in German. How do you pronounce it? I know German, and it took me way too long to read it. In German, you can combine words to make words. The caption reads, "This is why Germans don't play Scrabble." By the way, the word is best translated as floor ski machine rental. In English, it would read jet ski snow rental. Last up is a cartoon making fun of the vaccination situation. One person approaches a very long line and asks, "Excuse me, is this the line to sign up for the lottery that gets me on the wait list to take a number to receive my vaccine bingo card?" Someone answers, "It was. They just changed the procedures again." In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. The world is learning a lot about COVID, and they're learning about it from Israel, the Jewish state. And it's hard to imagine, but Israel right now has 40% of all of COVID infections are school-age kids. Another 40% of the infections are Haredi, which composes only 11% of the population. The need for ventilators has increased sixfold for people between 40 and 60 years old in Israel. 17 patients under the age of 40 are now on ventilators. Another 25 people under 40 are on ECMO, which is a heart-lung machine. It's the last hope for these people for recovery. Israel is making all their numbers public to help the world understand how to confront this killer virus. Israel, 900 Holocaust survivors have died from COVID. 5,300 Holocaust survivors contracted the deadly virus. They are powerful numbers. As of now, only 179,600 Holocaust survivors are living in Israel. 850 survivors live to the age of 100. 66% of those are women. Imagine the indignity of surviving the horrors of Nazism and Hitler's murder machine, only to succumb to COVID. Everyone who gets COVID got it from someone else who was not careful. Think about that. The Iran and nuclear deal, the game is on. President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal in 2018. 3 years later, the new U.S. administration under President Biden is excited about getting back to the negotiation table. Don't expect that this will be easy. As much as Iran wants it, and as much as Biden wants to make it happen, Iran's foreign ministry flat out rejected changing participation in negotiations. This was the response to France's President Emmanuel Macron suggesting that Saudi Arabia join the table, that they join the negotiations. Iran responded flatly, quote, "The nuclear accord is a multilateral international agreement ratified by UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which is non-negotiable, and parties to it are clear and unchangeable," unquote. Iran knows that France and the rest of the Western world want to stack the deck against them. The Saudis would join with Western nations and become a force against Iran. Iran was correct to reject Saudi participation in the talks. I don't often say that Iran is correct. Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz and his U.S. colleague, Defense Minister Lloyd Austin, held a phone conversation the other day. Obviously, Gantz congratulated Austin on assuming his new position as United States Secretary of Defense. Gantz emphasized how he was looking forward to continuing the spectacular relationship that has been in place for decades between the countries. They also spoke about Iran, an area of potential tension. Gantz clearly stated that Iran is a serious threat to the region, and especially Israel. He emphasized the importance of working together on issues concerning Iran and the importance of coordinating information and sharing strategy. There was no comment from the United States. Jordan's King Abdullah used his time in Davos attending the World Economic Summit to attack Israel for not vaccinating the Palestinians. The king's attack was not that Israel was not vaccinating Israeli Arabs, but rather that Israel was not vaccinating 2.8 million Palestinians living under Palestinian control in the West Bank, and the 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. Here's the problem. Palestinian leadership has not asked Israel for the vaccines. And actually, according to the Oslo Accords, Palestinians are responsible for their own health care. And there's even a bigger issue here. For weeks, Palestinian leadership has been working to get the vaccine from Russia through the Sputnik 5 vaccine program. PA leadership has also been insisting that they are going through the United Nations to get their vaccine. And they have repeatedly said that their program will begin in February. So why in January is the King of Jordan attacking Israel? The simple answer is that attacking Israel is an easy way to deflect personal responsibility. Attacking Israel unifies all those who hate Israel. As an addendum, Israel has given a limited quantity of vaccines to the Palestinians. As of this taping, 20,000 vaccines were given to the Palestinians. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played
songs that made the hit parade.
I brought a meme from the iconic 70s TV show All in the Family. That comedy show ran from 1971 to 1979. 7 other TV shows were spun off that one program. The show was about a middle-class family in Queens. The patriarch of the family was named Archie, and he was a loud, opinionated, white racist. His character, Archie Bunker, was played none other by Carol O'Connor. In today's parlance, the term Archie Bunker refers to and is shorthand for an ignorant, stubborn racist.
Oh, no, I'm going to sue that guy. First thing in the morning, I'm going to get myself a good Jew lawyer.
Archie, do you always have to label people? Why can't you just get a lawyer? Why does it have to be a Jewish lawyer?
Because when I'm going to sue an Arab, I'm going to get a guy that's full of hate.
I'm gonna pay a visit to my attorneys first thing tomorrow morning. Where do you see them guys? They are 7 savage Jews that won't leave a scrap on your bones.
Maybe she's a live-in maid.
Well, what are you talking about, Edie? The only people nowadays can afford live-in help are rich people and Jews.
Not all Jewish people are rich.
I never knew one that wasn't. What are you doing with that on your head? Come on, Murray, this is a dinner, it ain't a funeral.
This one's for you.
Oh, come on, look. What do you mean, You know, we look like a couple of fat shinks.
Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.